Right, so I've got 3 questions for you guys, and I thought we could open it out to the audience. First question, what innovation is exciting you most at the moment in dating?
As I was saying earlier, it's not entirely clear how dating and video will come together. We're right now in this hybrid stage where we're viewing kind of our dating community as kind of an entertainment network. But I think you will see live video come to apps like Tinder, apps like Badoo. I think it's really just a matter of time, but I'm not entirely sure what form they're going to be in.
Robyn?
I think what I'm most excited about and looking at the most is the idea of dating companies building brands that extend with services further outside of that core competency. So, Grindr's making some big moves that they did their merchandise stuff. There's a lot of companies making big content plays at the moment, and I think that's something that we're quite focused on. Like we're starting some clothing as well, and the experience side of it. And I think it might be that it only works within communities and kind of like sub-niches if it's an audience that connects for that reason. But I think for lifetime value of a customer, it gives you a lot of potential upside for a much longer relationship.
I think I'll come at this from a marketing standpoint. The most interesting thing that's happened for us in the last year is really the influencer world. For the longest time, we've just felt that like celebrity interactions were not really workable in our business. The numbers didn't work. They weren't affordable. And what has happened with the influencer sort of model and the fact that agencies have sprung up who now represent these to Hollywood agents and help them understand the value for their clients is that a lot of people that used to just not be touchable are now very available for very low prices, so to speak. And so we've done a couple of these. Celebrity Chef, we did something with the host of The Bachelor, Chris Harrison, and these are huge. Boy, these guys have huge followings. They have tremendous lift, and an association with them is great because it's very narrow. You can pinpoint exactly who you want to go after. I don't know how many people here know what NASCAR is, but for example, I don't know anything about NASCAR. It's a kind of a southern U.S. racing circuit, but it speaks to a very narrow consumer niche, and so those folks have a tremendous pull within their area, and so it's just opened up a lot of things that we thought were not possible.
And we saw that in Justin's slides, didn't we, with the image of Kylie Jenner on Instagram from Bumble. I mean, and that's huge, getting a Kardashian behind your brand, if that's your target audience.
For the two of them, it costs $600,000.
Oh, so everyone's just going to get Kardashian next week, right?
A light exploration into the...
So what do you guys consider the biggest challenges in the industry at the moment?
My scale is like totally different to these guys, but for us, it's just continuing to grow at the pace that we have been, and I'm sure that's a challenge that everyone meets as you get bigger and looking at different channels, trying to manage our acquisition cost as the rate just scales, and I think you start getting into low-hanging fruit, and then it gets much bigger. I think probably the other big thing that I'm concerned about is fraud and the amount of fraud that's happening in the dating space, and it seems to be growing, and there's a lot of really great companies doing a lot to help address it, and every company addresses it in their own way. But when there are these, like, all the stuff on our platform, it all migrates off onto Kik or Telegram, and some of that goes quite rapidly out of your control or ability to do anything. So I think that's probably something that I'm concerned about.
I think data. So, we have 2.5 million people logging into our apps every day, 10 million every month. But when a human's logging in, they're really only getting 15 to 20 users at the top of their list, right? And who are we putting you at the top of that list? So it's we've struggled with this. We've been investing in this heavily. Is it age, gender, location, attractiveness, kind of reply rates? What is the right mix, and how do you learn kind of from the network? And this is just going to be an ongoing problem, trying to make the best recommendations.
It's fraud for me. It's an undeniable fact, but The press, of course, is very interested in fraud. The stories that are most concerning are not even necessarily the ones that are having the biggest impact, but certainly when a 65-year-old woman who's retired gives $150,000 to a man she met on your site. It's a special problem because, of course, she gave him the money. And so law enforcement has no role to play. They sort of just point back at us and say, well, you should be teaching people not to do this. So it's a special kind of problem that we feel a lot of responsibility for. And we've tried a lot of tactics, frankly, to educate our user base about it, but it's still a troubling thing.
Okay, my final question before we open it out to the audience. I think between you, doing some rough maths in my head, you've got about 30 years experience in this dating industry. There are a lot of people here today who are just starting out. What would your advice be to them? What do you wish someone had told you at day one or year one?
Go to law school.
My experience was, because this is a very personal thing for me in it, and a lot of people get into dating because it's personal. You have insight on it and you have an idea. One, I think a lot of people coming into it think that the big players haven't seen the world in the way that they have. The reality is they have. There's a reason some people don't do certain things, and so look at what other companies are doing and learn from that. Don't just disregard it. And also, I was so passionately dedicated to our user base and creating the best possible ultimate experience. But a lot of those things, scale is the ultimate game here, and you have to hit large scale to be able to do anything, to get good data, to make good decisions, to provide a valuable experience. And it means that you have to compromise on some things that you might want to make inside your product to your community, but ultimately it's massively going to be worth it because you can provide a much better experience than if you're really crafting stuff too much.
What's that idea of just scalability? In an ideal world, when it comes to verifying your users, if you could, you turn up at everyone's house and meet them face to face, but you can't scale that, and it's working that out in all of those different scenarios, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jeff?
I'd say raise as little money as possible, right? So, I think I've seen that mistake made a number of times where, because of the nature of this business, where you frankly are likely to sell at a 10 times EBITDA multiple at some point down the road. It's easy to get upside down on the cap table. So you might raise because you could convince some venture capitalists, and frankly, that's harder to do now. But that if you could raise 10 on a 100 post because you have 10 million in revenue, it's well, okay, now you have to turn that into about 20 million in EBITDA to just 2x that investment in an eventual acquisition at a 10 times EBITDA multiple. That's hard, right? So I would say, my experience has been kind of long, hard slog, but kind of interesting. It's never a bad time to get started. I wouldn't think it's that, but if you could avoid over-raising, I would do that.
I would say spend some time working on your narrative before you spend a lot of time working on your business. Because the fact is, everyone who uses your sites or your app is going to have a lot of options, a lot of choices. And we like the companies that we do business with. That's kind of pre-funnel, is this vague thing. I like those guys. I like who they are. I like what they're doing. I like why they're doing it. And you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I can remember once in the very early days, I emailed our entire user base. I emailed a non-BCC email, so everyone got everyone's email. And I walked into the CEO's office to tell him, and I said, this is going to be my last day. And he said, why? I said, because I'm about to tell you something that's going to make you fire me. And so I told him, and he said, no, I'm not going to fire you. You have to stay here and fix this. So you will screw up. But the fact that the people that were using eHarmony at the time liked us and thought we were trying to do something good for the world, and they knew our story and they liked our narrative, those were things that allowed them to tolerate our stupid screw-ups. And so work on that story. Think think about what it is. It'll be very helpful for your press and your user relations.
Brilliant. Has anyone got any questions? Very quiet room.
Hi, my question is for Grant. Is eHarmony, are you doing away with your questionnaire? I heard that really
Well, that's a long answer. I'll try to make it short for you. We built a version of the questionnaire that lets you answer about 10 or 12 questions and then get matches. We still think that compatibility is the best way to end up in a happy relationship. But what I'd rather do is try and convince you of that once you're in the system, rather than carpet bomb you with emails from without the system, which is how it's been for many years. The reason it's a little bit complicated is because we've begun to pull data in from the social graph about you. And so ideally, we could ask you fewer questions every few months, but maintain the same level of data about you. And so that's really the goal.
I'm sorry, when you say that you're pulling this data from the social graph, what do you mean?
Well, let's say that you have a very long list of athletic behaviors that you like on Facebook. I don't really need to ask you questions about how athletic you are if you are clearly a marathoner who does Tough Mudders and, you know, likes a certain set of things. That's probably the dumbest example I can give, but oftentimes people really explain who they are in the choices that they make socially.
So are you requiring a Facebook integration now?
We're not. This is something that we're working on, and as it is today, you still have to take, if you want the full experience, 120 questions, although that's dynamic as well, and you can take fewer depending on how you answer them. This is something that we're working towards, and I think ideally, depending on your choices in social media, we would be able to ask you 20, 30, 40 questions and still get the same rich trove of data about you.
Any other questions?
When you were answering the questions earlier, Robyn, about expansion and market, what about regions of the world where there's not much engagement with you these days? Are there any challenges that you have at the moment across particular ethnic groups or particular regions that are difficult, and how do you approach overcoming them?
So the question, I think, was how do you deal with particular regions of the world when you're growing? So Meet Me's in about 18 languages, and we do things like when a new build goes out, we actually look at kind of the before and after ratings in the App Store, Play Store, to see if, you know, we may have broke something inadvertently in a language leading to more negative reviews. When we acquire users, and we spend about $1.5 million or so a month on paid marketing, we tend to look at, we take a subset of that and go after kind of international, and then within international, we're generally looking for areas that are getting some traction in organic downloads that we could then invest in and try to grow. So I don't know. You know, we haven't really faced, you know, significant cultural issues with that growth, and we're still trying to learn. That's actually one of the data requests I have out to try to understand how video's uptake is outside of kind of our core audience of English speaking. But you know, what we find is, you know, international 3-4 years ago was defined as essentially non-English, was probably about 15% of our traffic, and now it's closer to 60%. But it's only about 20% of our revenue, but not trivial.
I would just make one point. We definitely do see differences from market to market, and it's a challenge because we're not structured so that we will build a vastly different product for every single locale, although there are certainly differences. Just a couple of examples. You know, the Midwest of the U.S., very conservative, very aligned with relationships, very rich market for us. Australia, much more casual market. And language about serious relationships seems to get a, hey man, don't rush me kind of response from people. We have a team in Australia that tries to fine-tune what we do, but there are parts of our brand that are really key and core to the offering that don't exactly jive with a lot of Australian attitudes. And so it's been painful to calibrate things so that it makes sense. I mean, it's not certainly a fatal kind of problem, but it's just something that you have to stay on top of. And I go down to Australia to do press and things to just try and stay in touch with that market. It seems like it's the most different in attitude in the countries where we do marketing and press.
Okay, guys, I think I'm going to hand over to John. So thank you so much, all three of you. You're absolute legends.